Chapter 1. The air in Mist Valley didn't just carry a chill. It carried the scent of rot and broken spirits. High above, the jagged cliffs of the canyon swallowed the moonlight, leaving the auction grounds bathed in a sickly, flickering orange glow from the resin-soaked torches. Thick, unnatural fog, the kind that clung to your clothes like damp wool, crawled over the jagged stone floor, swirling around the ankles of the hundreds of shifters gathered in the pit. This was the Shadow Market, a place where the law of the Alpha King was whispered to be absent, and where flesh was just another commodity. I stood at the center of it all, perched on a raised platform of rotting oak that groaned under the slightest movement. The iron collar was a frozen serpent around my throat, biting into my skin every time I shivered. My breath hit the freezing air in frantic white plumes. "Look at her." Silas, my half-brother, spat the words like venom. He stepped out of the swirling mist, his heavy boots thumping against the wood. He gripped my hair, yanking my head back so hard my neck arched painfully, exposing the pale line of my throat to the bitters. An Omega, with a scent so faint she might as well be human. A glitch in the Thorn bloodline. She can't shift, she can't hunt, and her own fated mate threw her to the dirt the moment he saw how weak she was. Laughter erupted from the darkness below, jagged and cruel. It echoed off the damp canyon walls, sounding like the snapping of dry bones. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to retreat into the small dark corner of my mind where my wolf lay dormant. She was a silent thing, a flicker of silver fur trapped behind a wall of ancient, unyielding ice. "Who will take this useless mouth to feed?" Silas yelled, his voice bouncing through the fog. "I'll even throw in the deed to the abandoned Silver Vein mine. Just take her off my hands before she stains my family's reputation any further." Silence followed. It was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant lonely howl of a rogue wolf somewhere in the crags above. No one moved. To them, I was a defective product in a beautiful wrapper. My heart hammered against my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. The only spark of life in this graveyard of a valley. "Going once," Silas sneered, raising the heavy iron gavel. "Going twice. 1,000,000 gold coins for the girl." The voice didn't just speak. It tore through the atmosphere, a low tectonic growl that silenced the wind itself. The mist at the back of the clearing didn't just part. It seemed to recoil in fear, fleeing from the man who stepped through it. Malachor Vane. The Alpha King of Obsidian Peak didn't belong in a place this filthy. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator who had forgotten what it felt like to fear. His black dragon scale coat swept the mist aside, and the scent he carried hit me like a physical blow. Scorched obsidian, rain-drenched pine, and the terrifying metallic tang of an alpha's dominance. He stepped into the torchlight, and the temperature in the valley seemed to plummet and rise all at once. A jagged silver scar tore across the left side of his chest, visible through his partially unbuttoned shirt, a brutal reminder of the bond he had severed with his own hands. His eyes were molten gold, glowing with a predatory light that pinned me to the spot. "And the mine, your majesty?" Silas stammered, his knees visibly shaking as the king approached the stage. "Keep your dirt," Malachor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous silkiness. He climbed the steps, each footfall sounding like a death knell. He stopped inches from me, his shadow swallowing me whole. The heat radiating from his massive frame was a furnace against my frozen skin. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a terrifying, clinical hunger. He reached out, the leather of his glove creaking, and caught my chin. He didn't use his hand. He used the cold, flat edge of a black steel dagger tilting my face up until I was forced to drown in those burning gold depths. "You smell of forbidden secrets and ancient frost, little wolf," he whispered, his breath ghosting over my lips. "They think you are broken. I think you are a key." He turned to the crowd, his grip on my jaw tightening just enough to command my absolute attention. "She is mine. Anyone who looks at her again will lose their eyes." He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, sending a jolt of pure, electric terror, and something far more traitorous, down my spine. "Do not hope for kindness, Calla Thorne," he growled into my skin. "I did not buy a mate. I bought a tool. And if you break before I find what I need, I will leave you in the snow to freeze just as I found you." Chapter 2. The journey to Obsidian Peak was a blur of freezing wind and the rhythmic thumping of Midnight's hooves, Malacor's massive shadow-furred stallion. I had been tossed unceremoniously onto the saddle in front of the king, my back pressed against the iron-hard plate of his chest. He didn't speak a word the entire ride, but his arm was a heavy, inescapable bar across my waist, pinning me to him as we ascended the jagged spine of the mountains. By the time the iron gates of the fortress shrieked open, my limbs were numb and my spirit was frayed to a single thin thread. Obsidian Peak was not a home. It was a monument to power. Constructed from volcanic glass and black granite, the castle clawed at the sky like a frozen wave. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax, ancient parchment, and the underlying scent of 1,000 wolves. "Kaelin," Malachor barked as we dismounted in the courtyard. A lean man with a mess of tawny hair and a permanent, lopsided grin sauntered out of the shadows. His eyes, bright green and sharp, swept over me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "My king," Kaelin bowed, though the gesture was teasing. "I see you've brought back a stray, and a thorn, no less. Are we collecting relics now?" "She is a guest of the crown," Malachor snapped, his voice tight. "See that she is bathed and fed. And Kaelin, if a single hair on her head is harmed by the staff, I'll have your tail for a rug." Kaelin's grin faltered for a fraction of a second as he caught the warning in the king's eyes. "Understood. Come along, little bird. Let's get those chains off you." An hour later, I was sitting in a copper tub filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender and crushed pine. For the first time in years, the grime of the Thorn estate was washed away, but the ghost of the iron collar still felt like it was choking me. I was dressing in a simple, high-collared gown of slate-gray silk when the heavy oak door creaked open. I froze, clutching the fabric to my chest, expecting a servant. It was Malachor. He had shed his heavy coat. In the flickering firelight of the hearth, he looked less like a king and more like a god of war. His shirt was open at the collar, revealing the jagged edge of the scar that sat right over his heart, the place where a mate bond should have been. "I told you to stay away," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is my castle, Calla. There is no corner of it where I do not belong," he said, his voice a low vibration that made the water in the basin ripple. He walked toward me, his movements silent, predatory. He held a small crystal jar in his hand. "Sit." It wasn't a request. I sat on the edge of the velvet-covered bed, my heart racing so hard I was sure he could hear it. He knelt between my knees. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. Even kneeling, he nearly reached my height. He opened the jar, and the scent of healing herbs filled the room. Without a word, his large, calloused hand reached out and tilted my head to the side. I flinched as his fingers touched the raw red welts left by the iron collar. "Be still, Osva," he murmured. His touch was unexpectedly gentle, his thumb tracing the bruised skin with a lightness that made my breath hitch. As he applied the cool salve, a strange sensation began to pool in my stomach, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why spend so much gold on a glitch?" Malacor's hand paused. He looked up, and for a second, the golden fire in his eyes softened into something dark and unreadable. "Because Silas Thorne is a fool. He sees a wolf that cannot shift. I see a power so ancient it had to be buried in ice to keep the world from burning." His gaze dropped to my lips, and the air in the room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. His scent, obsidian and wild storm, wrapped around me, calling to the silent, frozen wolf inside my soul. For the first time in my life, she didn't just shiver. She leaned toward him. He felt it. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. His hand moved from my neck to my jaw, his thumb dragging across my lower lip. "You are not a tool, Kalata," he growled, his voice dropping an octave, raw and jagged with a hunger he seemed to hate. "You are a temptation I cannot afford." He pulled away abruptly, the sudden coldness leaving me shivering. He stood, his jaw clenched tight. "Rest. Tomorrow the council arrives. They will want to know why I have brought a thorn into the heart of the peak. Do not make me regret saving you." He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, he stopped. "And Kala, lock the door. My wolf is restless tonight, and he has a taste for things that don't belong to him." The heavy door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. I slumped back against the pillows, my skin still tingling where he had touched me. I reached behind my neck, my fingers brushing the small of my back. It was burning. I walked to the mirror and pulled the silk gown down. There, etched into the pale skin between my shoulder blades, was a faint, glowing mark, a snowflake, intricate and lethal, shimmering with a soft blue light. The seal of the Frost Walkers was breaking. Chapter 3. The moon was a sliver of bone in a bruised purple sky. In the heart of Obsidian Peak, the night did not bring peace. It brought a low, vibrating hum of anxiety that made the hair on my arms stand up. Every wolf in the castle was restless. I could hear them through the stone walls, the pacing of heavy paws, the occasional sharp yip of a subordinate, and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of a pack on edge. But it was the silence from the king's wing that terrified me most. I lay in bed, my skin feverish. The snowflake mark on my back felt like a brand of dry ice, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I couldn't sleep. My internal wolf, the one they called a glitch, was clawing at my ribs, her silent howls echoing in the hollow of my chest. Suddenly, a sound shattered the quiet. A roar, so primal and laden with agony that the windows of my room rattled in their frames. It wasn't the roar of a king. It was the scream of a beast being torn apart from the inside. Without thinking, I threw back the silk sheets. My feet hit the cold stone, and I ran. I ignored the guards at the end of the hall, who looked pale and refused to meet my eyes, and pushed open the double obsidian doors of Malacor's private chambers. The room was a disaster. Heavy oak furniture had been reduced to splinters. Tapestries lay shredded on the floor. In the center of the devastation, Malacor knelt, his fingers buried so deep in the stone flooring that the rock was cracking. He wasn't shifted, not fully, but he wasn't human either. His back was arched, muscles bulging and rippling like tectonic plates, shifting beneath his skin. His hair was a wild mane, and those golden eyes were now twin suns of pure, unadulterated rage. "Get out," he gasped, the words sounding like they were being dragged over broken glass. "You're hurting," I said, stepping closer despite every survival instinct screaming at me to flee. The air in the room was electric, thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy, musk-laden pheromones of a feral alpha. "It is the moon of the severed." Kalen's voice came from the shadows near the balcony. He looked uncharacteristically grim, his usual smirk replaced by a line of tension. "When a king rips his mate bond away, the moon demands attacks in blood. Every month the bond remains empty. His wolf is trying to kill him, Kala. Stay back." Malachor let out another guttural snarl, his forehead hitting the floor. The scar on his chest was glowing a sickly, bruised red. My wolf surged. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was angry. She hated seeing him like this. I bypassed Kalen and knelt in the wreckage beside the king. "Malachor, look at me." He swung his head toward me, his fangs fully extended, a low growl vibrating in his throat that should have sent me running. Instead, I reached out. I placed my hand directly over his heart, over that cursed, glowing scar. The moment my skin touched his, the world turned white. A shockwave of cold, absolute crystalline frost shot from my palm and into his chest. Malachor froze. The jagged heat of his skin met the unnatural ice of mine. And for a second, the room went silent. The red glow of his scar began to fade, replaced by a soothing pale blue light. His breathing hitched, slowly. The tension drained from his massive frame. He collapsed forward, his head landing heavily in the crook of my neck. He was panting, his skin slick with sweat, but the madness in his eyes was receding. "Cold," he whispered into my skin, his voice small, vulnerable. "So cold. It's perfect." He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me flush against him. I was a tiny bird caught in the grip of a mountain, but I didn't feel crushed. I felt claimed. His nose brushed the pulse point of my neck, inhaling deeply. "Your scent," he muttered, his lips grazing my skin. "It's changing. It's not just pine anymore. It's winter air. It's home." The sexual tension shifted, sharpening into something dangerous. He was no longer a beast in pain. He was a man in hunger. He shifted his weight, pinning me beneath him on the rug. His golden eyes searched mine, searching for the glitch Silas had mocked, and finding only a queen hidden in the frost. "I should send you away," he growled, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw, his touch possessive and heavy. "Before I forget that you are a thorn. Before I mark you as mine and start a war I cannot stop." I looked up at him, my heart hammering, not in fear but in a strange, wild defiance. "Maybe I'm tired of being sent away, Malachor." He leaned down, his lips inches from mine, the heat of his body melting the frost I had just created. But before his mouth could meet mine, the doors burst open. Kalen stood there, breathless, a scroll clutched in his hand. "My king, forgive the intrusion, but the scouts, Silas Thorne isn't just coming for a parley. He's brought the High Elders and a battalion of Silver Guard. They've crossed the Black River." Malachor stiffened, his eyes snapping back to gold. He stood up in one fluid motion, pulling me up with him, his hand never leaving mine. Why would he risk my wrath for an Omega he claimed was useless? Malachor asked, his voice cold enough to shatter bone. "They aren't coming for an Omega," Kalen said, his eyes flickering to the glowing snowflake mark visible through the back of my disheveled gown. "They've realized what she is. They're coming for the Frostwalker. They say she belongs to the Blood Right, and they're here to take her back by force." Malachor's grip on my hand tightened until it was almost painful. He looked at me, a dark, territorial smirk curling his lips. "Let them come," the Alpha King whispered. "I paid for her in gold, but I will keep her in blood." Chapter 4. The war didn't start with a roar. but with a whisper of frost and a shadow where there should have been light. While the Silver Guard and Silas's men were making a loud, distracting show of force at the obsidian gates, the true threat was already inside the heart of the fortress. Malachor had left me in the library, guarded by 4 of his elite warriors, while he went to the battlements to command the defense. "Stay here," he had told me, his eyes burning with a possessive fire. "If anyone so much as breathes in your direction, my men will end them. I'm coming back for you, Calla. We aren't finished with that conversation." But Malachor, for all his lethal instincts, had forgotten one thing. A ghost doesn't trigger an alarm. The air in the library suddenly turned sickly sweet, the scent of rotting lilies clashing with the crisp winter air of the castle. My guards collapsed without a sound, their eyes rolling back as they hit the floor. I stood, my hand flying to the Frostwalker mark on my back, which was now screaming with a cold, piercing agony. "He always did have a penchant for the broken ones," a voice purred from the balcony shadows. A woman stepped into the moonlight. She was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl, pale, elegant, with eyes the color of stagnant water. She wore the crest of the obsidian peak, but it was tarnished, scratched out by a jagged blade. "Lyra," I whispered, the name of Malachor's dead mate tasting like ash in my mouth. "Not dead, little Omega," she smiled, and the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Just displaced. I spent years in the void waiting for a way back, and then you appeared, a Frostwalker, the only blood capable of opening the vault of the first king." Before I could scream, she was across the room. Her speed was supernatural, fueled by something darker than a wolf's instinct. She gripped my throat, her nails digging into my skin. "Silas thinks he's getting a weapon. He's a fool. You are a key, and once I use you to unlock the source of the Alpha Spark, Malachor will be mine again. He'll have no choice. The bond will be forced back into place." On the battlements, Malachor felt it. He was mid-sentence, shouting an order to Kaelin, when he suddenly buckled, clutching his chest. The severed bond, the one he had lived with for years, didn't just ache, it snapped toward a new direction. "Calla," he gasped, his wolf clawing at his insides. He didn't look at the army outside. He turned and ran toward the royal wing, his boots thundering against the stone. "Malachor, wait! It's a trap!" Kaelin yelled. But the king was a blur of black and gold rage. He burst into the library just in time to see a swirling vortex of shadow swallowing the balcony. Lyra stood there, her arm hooked around my neck, a jagged obsidian dagger pressed to my heart. "Hello, my love," Lyra cooed. Malachor skidded to a halt, the floor beneath his feet cracking from the force. His face was a mask of pure horror. You died in the gorge." "I survived. For us," she lied, her voice dripping with false honey. "And now, I'm going to save our kingdom. All I need is the blood of this little glitch." I looked at Malachor. His golden eyes were wide, flickering between the woman who had once been his everything and the girl he had bought at an auction. For a heartbeat, the silence was absolute. "Let her go, Lyra," Malachor said, his voice a low, vibrating threat that shook the very foundations of the castle. "If you hurt her, there is no corner of this world, living or dead, where I won't find you." "Choose, Malachor," Lyra shrieked, her grip tightening. "The mate who shared your soul, or this empty vessel?" In that moment, I realized I couldn't be a tool anymore. My wolf, the silver flame behind the ice, finally shattered her cage. "I am not empty," I whispered. The air in the room didn't just get cold, it froze. The moisture in Lyra's eyes turned to ice. The ink in the books crystallized. A shock wave of pure blue energy erupted from the mark on my back, throwing Lyra backward. But as she fell toward the balcony's edge, she lunged, her hand catching my ankle. If I can't have the power, neither will you. She dragged me over the railing. I fell into the abyss of the canyon, the mist swallowing the world. The last thing I heard was Malacor's scream, a sound of such raw, agonizing loss that it shattered the windows of the entire fortress. Calla! Then I saw a shadow leap after me, a massive black shape silhouetted against the moon, choosing the fall over a life without me. Chapter 5. The wind did not just whistle, it screamed as I plummeted. Gravity was a cruel hand, stripping the breath from my lungs as the mist of the gorge rose up to swallow me. Beside me, the shadow of Lyra was a frantic, thrashing thing, her scream lost to the roar of the air, but my eyes were fixed upward, on the silhouette that had leaped from the balcony without a second's hesitation. Malachor. He wasn't falling. He was hunting the wind. He shifted mid-air, a violent bone-snapping transformation that turned the king into a mountain of black fur and muscle. A wolf the size of a warhorse, his coat the color of a starless night, dived through the clouds toward me. I'm going to die, I thought. But my wolf, the silent, frozen glitch, finally spoke. It wasn't a whisper. It was a shatter. No, she growled. You are the winter. The blue mark on my back erupted. It wasn't just light anymore. It was physical force. The air around me crystallized instantly. Millions of snowflakes formed out of thin air, weaving together to create a swirling, sapphire blue vortex that slowed my descent. I wasn't falling anymore. I was drifting, suspended in a pillar of ancient frost. Below me, Lyra hit the mist and vanished into the darkness of the river, her treachery silenced by the depths. But the Alpha King did not stop. He slammed into the ice pillar I had created, his massive paws gripping the frozen air. He shifted back to his human form as he slid toward me, his clothes shredded, his skin bleeding from the sheer force of the wind. He caught me, his arms locking around my waist with such desperation that I felt his ribs shudder against mine. I have you, he roared over the howling storm. Calla, look at me. Hold on. We hit the ledge of a massive ice bridge that my own subconscious had slammed into the canyon walls. The impact was jarring, sending us sliding across the glass smooth surface. Malachor twisted his body, taking the brunt of the hit, his back slamming into the stone wall to shield me. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. I looked up. The entire gorge had been transformed. Where there had been mist and moss, there was now a cathedral of sapphire ice. The waterfall had frozen midair into a curtain of diamonds. Malachor lay against the stone, his chest heaving. The golden glow in his eyes was fading, replaced by a raw, human vulnerability I had never seen. He looked at his hands, then at the frozen world around us, and finally at me. A glitch, he wheezed, a bloody smirk tugging at his lips. They called you a glitch. Malachor, you're bleeding, I whispered, reaching out to touch the gash on his forehead. He caught my wrist. He didn't pull away this time. He pressed my palm to his cheek, his skin burning hot against my winter-chilled flesh. Let it bleed, he growled. He crawled forward, forcing me back against the ice until I was trapped between his massive frame and the frozen wall. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man who had seen the end of the world and realized the only thing that mattered was the girl in his arms. I watched you fall, he whispered, his voice fracturing. And in that second, the crown, the kingdom, the revenge, it all turned to ash. My wolf didn't jump for a tool, Calla. He jumped for his soul. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The scent of him, obsidian, smoke, and now the sharp tang of my own frost was intoxicating. "I bought you with gold," he murmured against my lips, "but I was the one who was poor. I have spent years tearing at my own heart to keep the world out. But you just froze the fire." He didn't ask for permission. He claimed it. His kiss was a collision of elements, the heat of a dying star meeting the absolute zero of the north. It was desperate, possessive, and thick, with the promise of a bond that no elder or council could ever break. As he kissed me, I felt the last of the seals on my heart shatter. My wolf let out a long silver howl of triumph. Above us, the sound of horn blasts echoed. Silas and his army had reached the canyon rim. They looked down at the frozen wasteland, at the king who knelt in the snow, cradling the girl they had thrown away. Malachor pulled back just an inch, his eyes turning a lethal, predatory gold once more. He stood up, pulling me to my feet and tucking me firmly under his arm. He looked up at the rim, his voice carrying through the frozen air like a thunderclap. "Silas Thorn," the king bellowed, "you came to claim a vessel. Look upon your queen. Look upon the frost walker who has frozen the very gates of hell." He turned to me, his gaze softening for a fleeting second. "Are you ready to show them what happens when you try to reclaim what belongs to the king?" I looked at the glowing blue light in my palms, then at the man who had jumped into an abyss for me. I didn't feel like a rejected Omega anymore. "I don't want them to see," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I want them to feel." Chapter 6. The silence that followed the Alpha King's roar was absolute, broken only by the sharp, melodic cracking of the ice bridge under my feet. High above, Silas Thorn looked down from the canyon rim, his face pale and contorted with a mixture of greed and terror. He saw the girl he had sold for gold standing amidst a fortress of sapphire frost, protected by the very man he thought would destroy her. "Calla," Silas's voice wavered, echoing thin and pathetic against the frozen stone. "You are a thorn, that power. It belongs to our bloodline. Come back now, and we can forget this." I didn't let him finish. I raised my hand, and the air hummed. A single shard of ice, as thin as a needle and as hard as diamond, shot upward, burying itself in the snow inches from his designer boots. "The thorns gave me chains, Silent," I said, my voice amplified by the swirling wind, cold and resonant. "The king gave me a choice. Go back to your rotting estate and tell the world the Frostwalker has returned, and she owes you nothing but the winter you left her in." Malachor stepped forward, his massive hand coming to rest on the small of my back, right over the glowing snowflake mark. His touch wasn't just heat, it was a promise. "Leave," he growled, a sound that made the silver guard at Silas's back recoil. "Before I decide that the snow needs more color today." They fled. The great army of the elders scrambled away like rats from a rising tide, leaving the gorge to the quiet falling snow and the two of us. 1 month later, Obsidian Peak was no longer a fortress of shadows. The ice I had summoned hadn't melted. It had integrated into the black stone, creating a palace of glass and obsidian that glittered under the full moon. The people, my people now, didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with a reverence that made my dormant wolf hum with a newfound pride. Tonight was the night of the claiming. I stood on the royal balcony, wearing a gown of silver silk that clung to my curves like a second skin. The air was crisp, but I no longer felt the bite of the cold. It was my element. It was my friend. A heavy footfall sounded behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. The scent of rain-drenched pine and scorched earth preceded him. warming the air around me. Kaelin says the wine is flowing like a river in the courtyard, Malachor murmured, his voice low and jaggedly sweet. And the pack is already howling your name, Luna. I turned, meeting his golden eyes. He had dressed in his formal black uniform, the silver medals glinting against his broad chest. But his gaze wasn't on the crown or the kingdom. It was pinned to me, filled with a hunger that was no longer about a tool or a key. I never thought I'd hear that title associated with my name, I whispered. Malachor walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped so close our chests brushed with every breath. He reached out, his large scarred hand cupping my cheek. You were never just an Omega, Kala, he said, his thumb tracing my lower lip. You were the storm I was waiting for. I bought you to find a killer, but you found the man I had buried under the ice. He dropped to one knee. The Alpha King, the man who had ripped his own fated bond apart rather than be controlled, knelt before me in the moonlight. He took my hand, his lips pressing a lingering, burning kiss to my knuckles. The gold I paid was an insult, he growled. Tonight, I offer you the only thing I have left that is worth anything. My life, my wolf, my name. Will you stay, not as a guest, but as my equal? I looked down at him, my heart overflowing with a heat that finally, completely melted the last of my insecurities. I reached out, my fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him up. I didn't stay for the king, Malachor, I said, a playful spark in my eyes. I stayed for the wolf who jumped after me. He let out a low, predatory rumble of approval. He pulled me into his arms, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that tasted of victory and forever. As we pulled back, he tilted my head, his fangs grazing the sensitive skin of my neck right over the pulsing vein. Mine? He whispered. A final question. Yours, I breathed, my eyes glowing a brilliant icy blue. Always. He leaned in, and as his teeth finally broke the skin in the sacred mark of the mate bond, a surge of power, fire and ice, exploded through our shared souls. Above Obsidian Peak, the aurora borealis flared into existence, painting the sky in shades of violet and sapphire. The rejected girl was gone. In her place stood a queen, marked by a king, and together they were a force that the winter itself would forever obey.